Okay, everyone, let's take a look at the flipped classroom version for the voting qualifications and non-voting. This, of course, goes over Unit 3, voting, elections, and media. If you take a peek real quick right here on our title page, what we're going to be looking at is an actual ballot from the 2000 election. It is a fairly organized ballot. If you've never voted before, it's divided into your federal portion, your state portion, and then local governments as well. So right here you see the President and Vice President of the United States. You're going to be voting here on this ballot in Churchill County, Nevada. You have quite a few candidates. When you're done voting for that office, then you vote for your U.S. Senator, the guy who goes to D.C. to represent you in the Senate. And then here you also will be voting for your congressman, and in this case it's the 2nd district. So again, you're going to vote for one of those. That is the only federal officials you're going to be voting for. So now you hit the state level, and since they're the governor and the executive offices in the state of Nevada must not be on the ballot, you do not have to vote for Secretary of State of Nevada, the comptroller, the treasurer, the governor. They are not on the ballot. But the state senator is, and your state assemblyman is. So you're going to be voting for those representatives to go to the capital of Nevada to represent you on all state issues. Since those are the only state officials on the ballot, now we go to the local. The next level is the county. So you're going to have a county commissioner district that you're going to be voting for, another one in District 3, and you're going to be voting for a county assessor. You might even be voting for local areas such as, for example, Lake Zurich mayor, Lake Zurich alderman, and whatnot. All of that would be on the ballot. So what are the voting requirements? Here they are. And one of the most significant things that people don't really realize is the Constitution isn't a very long document. It is fairly specific in the power that it gives to this brand new federal government, and whatever power, does not go to the federal government. The Constitution says that power goes to the states, and it's reinforced in the 10th Amendment, this concept of federalism. Whatever power doesn't go to the federal government goes to the states. What is odd is the Constitution says nothing about voting. So, since it says nothing about voting, that power goes to the states. Since the power is reserved to the states, then that can change through each state. And what you're going to find is you may have some discrepancies at different levels, but there are some commonalities. For example, there is the 26th Amendment, which basically says 18-year-olds and older are allowed to vote. For the most part, in virtually all the states, you have to be registered to vote. However, there is one or two states that are now allowing you to register the day of the test, the day of the election. Usually you have to register at least 30 days. That's what it is, the requirement here in Illinois. Most states say you have to live in the state for 30 days before an election to vote. And I think all states basically say you have to be a citizen in the United States. Now, having said that, you might say, wait a second, if the states are supposed to have the power, why do the federal government get involved? And that last bit of information down here, the federal government only gets involved if the state governments aren't doing their job in relation to voting. For example, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were meant to make sure that the states did allow the blacks to vote, because left to their own devices, they weren't. They were giving things like grandfather clauses and poll taxes and things like that. Those, in essence, are the voting requirements. So let's take a look at another facet of voting, and that's the extension of voting since the inception of the Constitution. I really want to make sure you know the amendments that refer to voting. I know other government teachers will make you memorize all the amendments. I like to have you memorize them all, but in relation to what we're studying. So there's going to be about 5 amendments that refer to voting, and you'll have to know those for the test. For example, an extension of voting, religious tests ends by the early 1800s. I think Massachusetts was the last state to require that. The 15th Amendment expanded the vote to African Americans. The 19th Amendment allowed women to vote. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 stops literacy tests, the grandfather clauses. In theory, the 15th Amendment being passed in the 1860s, 1870s, African Americans were allowed to vote after that. But southern states made hurdles such as literacy tests and grandfather clauses, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 stopped that. The 23rd Amendment talks about how the Electoral College vote is given 3 Electoral College votes to the District of Columbia. We'll talk about that. Remember, the way I remember the 23rd Amendment is that that's Michael Jordan's number, and if you remember, he retired from Chicago and then went to play in DC. So if you can remember that, of course, MJ known for making a lot of key three-pointers. If you can remember, 23 is Michael Jordan, known for three-pointers. 23rd Amendment, DC, it gets 3 Electoral College votes. Stupid, I know, but it might help some of you. 24th Amendment allows states cannot have a poll tax. And then finally, the 26th Amendment, 18-year-olds can vote. So those are the expansion of voting. There are people who cannot vote. Your book calls the term idiot from the Greek term for people who don't vote. Aliens cannot vote, and knee-jerk reaction is illegal aliens, but aliens, people are here legally in the United States with a visa to go to school or to have a job. They are not allowed to vote. Some religions don't allow you to vote. Jehovah's Witnesses are a prime example. Convicts, some are, some aren't. And I'm going to kind of click on this fairly quickly so you can see that. State felon voting laws. So if you look at this, we have a couple of different hurdles. Unrestricted. Convicted felons may vote by absentee ballot while in prison. And there are 2 states that allow that. I think that's Maine and, let's see, what is the other states? Vermont. Even in prison, you may be allowed to vote. So, again, it's a state issue, right? Federalism, since the Constitution doesn't talk about it, the states have the power to determine who can vote. You can, the next phase, the next hurdle would be you can vote after your term of incarceration is over, and that's 13 states and DC. I believe that's Illinois is in that field. So once you get out of prison, you're allowed to vote. Another hurdle might be added by 4 states. Once you're out of prison and your parole is over, you're allowed to vote. In 19 states, once you're out of prison, your parole and probation is over, then you're allowed to vote. And in some states, you may lose the right to vote permanently, no matter what happens. Now, if people realize that, if those felons knew they were going to lose the right to vote forever, I am sure they would have never committed those serious crimes. Just kidding. Ill or physically disabled people cannot vote. And when I say that they cannot vote, I'm not saying that they're not allowed to, but they are less apt to show up because they may be in the hospital or whatnot. If you're traveling, you cannot vote, though, having said that, in the last 8 years, they've tried to make it easier for people who are going to be out of town to vote. Before, it was only absentee ballot, and you had to prove why you were going to be out of town by showing airplane tickets or business airplane tickets or things like that. But now they have what is called early voting, which allows you to vote between 8 and 4 o'clock up to 3 weeks before the election. Again, the goal is to increase voting. If you have mental condition, you will probably, a serious mental condition, you'll probably be in a psychiatric hospital. Obviously, you will not be voting then. In jail, as we talked about. And you're not allowed to vote if you're drunk. I always use this as a joke, but please understand we have some examples of this, that if you ever make a mistake on a ballot, you should take a peek. You should always ask for a new ballot. Take a peek at some of these. This guy voted for Norm Coleman in an election between Norm Coleman and Al Franken in a senatorial race in Minnesota in 2004. I'm sorry, in 2008. This guy signed his name. Can't do that. Minnesota law says you cannot identify your own ballot. This guy voted for Norm Coleman or put an X and then wrote in Michelle Bachmann's name. If you're the election judge, what do? What's another one? Al Franken's lawyer said this is not a vote for Norm Coleman because the guy circled it and then crossed it out. So that ballot's up for dispute. Norm Coleman said clearly this guy voted for Al Franken, realized his mistake, and then tried to draw an arrow. Again, all of these under dispute because this was a recount. Let's see, what do we have? Again, this guy completely misses. That's a vote? Really? I mean, yikes. Beautiful. Guy voted for Al Franken and Norm Coleman and wanted to make sure they knew this was not a vote for Norm Coleman. What do we have? This guy voting, doing everything you need to do except for actually filling in the bubble. Check mark here, circling that. Again, an example of why you shouldn't, when you're drunk. Of course, I'm being sarcastic. Non-voting voters, that makes no sense. Some people will stop voting. It's called ballot fatigue because there's such a long ballot, so they stop voting halfway. You do not have to finish voting. If you want to just vote for president, that's fine. But again, when you are getting down to the county assessor, as we saw on the front title page, you might not know any of those candidates, so you might just skip those. See, she's exhausted. That's a long ballot. Actual non-voters depends on your voter self-esteem. Our term for that is political efficacy. I feel like my vote counts, so I have high political efficacy. Some people think there are cumbersome election procedures, like a long ballot. Registration is a pain. That's what they think. Registration is incredibly easy. Sometimes you'll run into long lines at the ballot box because before you go to work or after work, those tend to be the long lines. Bad weather might hamper, especially older people. My mom's 83. That might hamper her from going out on election day if it's raining, snowing, or things like that. I would vote in the first picture. That one, my car covered in ice, probably not. Time zone fallout basically implies this, that if you live in the West Coast over here and the election is over and they've basically announced that the president has enough electoral college votes to win, some of these people are less apt to go out and vote. So we call that time zone fallout. And some people just don't care. That guy doesn't look like he cares. Just a summary, just not interested, 30%, busy or out of town, 31, disability, 15, long lines, forgot, transportation trouble. Now what I'd like you to do is on the right hand side of my home, the Honors Government page, you'll see a Chapter 6 flipped classroom self-evaluation. Click that link, log into Google Docs, and I have just 1 or 2 or 3 questions for you to take, and so I can see what you understood and what you didn't, hopefully I can tackle once again. Thank you.